Two.
Good evening, everybody.
Hello,
Welcome.
Everyone.
Welcome to DnDTime Talks, where we discuss all things Dungeons and Dragons. As always, I am Pete.
And I'm the one with the working webcam, Jeremy. Pete, you just totally froze up there.
Oh, am I still trash?
You're good.
Well, we'll see.
How you doing, Pete?
We'll see how it goes. I'm doing pretty good. I'm glad to be back after our brief 1 week hiatus. I didn't know how much I needed talks until it wasn't there.
Thank you, by the way, the Fox in the Box, for your resubscription.
Fox!
We love us guys too.
What a crazy coincidence. What about you, Jeremy? How are you doing?
It's just another day. Got a Coca-Cola, which we're not sponsored by Coca-Cola. Which hopefully
nothing like a nice refreshing cola.
Generic brand cola.
So yeah, that's all we got. That's all we got for you today. The thing that we're going to be talking about, though, we got to dive right into it, because what we're talking about today is how to run a one-shot, which we're going to be breaking down over the next hour. This is a good one. This is going to be a good one, I think.
Agreed. I'm really excited about this one. It's gonna be pretty sweet. And I noticed we didn't put out a shout out on Discord. Pete, if
I got it.
Wouldn't mind, that'd be swag. Looks like my announcement bot in our super secret channel worked. But anywho, thanks everybody for tuning in. We're really excited about this one. One shot's pretty swag. Pete, I think it's fair to say you and I are kind of the experts at 1 hour one shots.
I mean, this is kind of the best facet of our game. If there was anything that we are qualified to talk about, it is one shots. So yeah, I'm pretty excited. If anyone watching has any thoughts or any kind of ideas that they want to contribute, please feel free to speak up in chat, and we'll try and get a good dialogue going back and forth. And also, if you just have just any questions or ideas that you want us to talk about for future weeks, we don't have much in the works. We're not in the midst of a series like we have been frequently on Talks, so the world is pretty open to us right now. So let us know what you think in that regard as well.
Yeah, we wanted to talk about this particular topic because we love one-shots. They are probably, they're one of the most common ways people experience Dungeons and Dragons, so it's kind of weird that we haven't talked about it yet. And then in addition to that, we're real familiar with them, so why not share some of our wisdom? And this is going to be a pretty Dungeon Master-centric kind of talks, but if you're a player, understanding how the game you're playing works is never gonna hurt. Realizing what's going on, why your dungeon master's doing what they're doing, all of that kind of stuff, knowing how to and when to work with your DM is really important toward having a very successful game. It's helpful
absolutely.
For everybody. Yeah, Farku. Wisdom. Shh, don't tell them, Farku. It's our secret.
So want to just start diving in proper, Jeremy?
Yeah, why not? Pete, first, before anything, what the hell is a one-shot? For those who may not be familiar with our terminology.
Well, Jeremy, I'd be happy to answer that question. It's a one-shot is an adventure that begins and completely finishes in one play session. So on the surface, that's pretty straightforward. It's what we do here on DnDTime. Pete and Jeremy's DnDTime. Each night we run 3 one-shots, so 3 complete adventures that start and begin. Each one is usually about an hour long. And then on Delves on Sunday that Jeremy runs a couple Sundays a month, those are also one-shots. They're just a slightly longer one-shot. Those are 3 to 4 hours. And that's kind of the main thing that defines a one-shot and what you're able to do with it, is just that this core feature that it starts and ends all in one session, which is simple, but then what kind of makes a one-shot successful is being able to execute everything that you want to do within your time constraints. Which, unlike other games, since you're supposed to completely just close out the adventure at the end of the session, you usually have to kind of stick on a pretty strict schedule, and it's usually assumed that players will like go through content that the DM has specifically prepared. One-shots aren't generally like sandbox kind of games. It's not impossible to do something like that, but as a rule, by necessity, one-shots are usually very railroady. You start with an objective, and then you kind of do that objective.
Yeah, and the big thing about one-shots is you look at a one-shot, and a one-shot by definition starts and ends in the same session. It comes to a conclusion. A good one-shot comes to a satisfying conclusion. That's the big difference, and that's the thing that a lot of people who run one-shots tend to miss, is that whole satisfying thing. So why do people play one-shots?
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think the core of the one-shot, there's the obvious, like, maybe that's all you have time to play. But usually that's because either you're playing with a new group. Maybe you want to introduce your friends to Dungeons & Dragons because you're super into it and you want them to all be into it too. So you do a one-shot to just give them kind of like a taste of what D&D is like. For the same vein, like an experienced group of players might want to do a one-shot before they go into a new campaign so that whoever is DMing can like try some things out, take some risks that they normally, as I think the way I said that, that they wouldn't take in a regular longer form game because either, they don't want to mess up the flow of a campaign, or they're trying out some new mechanics that they're not sure are going to work well. It's just a really good place to like experiment, to practice, to kind of grow as a DM. And also it's just like fun if you don't want to get in that deep on a long form campaign. You just want to do something. You want to try out DMing.
Yeah, and speaking of trying out DMing, that's how I really got my start. Is we had our back in the day, I had my group of friends, and we all wanted to play D&D, but no one either no one wanted to DM or no one was very good at DMing, and so we just ran one shots. We took turns running one shots, and that's how I got my first jump in, and that's how I pretty much became a DM. So running one-shots is the best way for a fledgling, or not a fledgling dungeon master, but someone who wants to get into dungeon mastering to really learn the ropes, because it's a trial by fire, right? Mm-hmm. And if something goes wrong, it doesn't matter. It was a one-shot. It's over. It's over.
Yeah.
You're good. Diving headfirst into a full campaign can be extremely stressful, and one-shots are the exact opposite of that. Which is great.
I started out on a full-fledged campaign, and I really wish I had done some one-shots before I went into it. I was in way over my head. And then later on, like, my first successful thing that I ran was just a one-shot, where you guys fought a Tarrasque, if you remember it, Jeremy.
Fought a Tarrasque is a way of putting it.
Well, but the point is it's a great way. I can personally testify that it's a great way to start, and I wish that I had done that.
Yeah, actually, Farku, a great point, kind of like Adventures League, where I'm not ultra familiar with Adventures League, but I've read a couple of their adventures, and for the most part, they seem fairly self-contained. So I think those would be a very great example of 1 to 3 hour one-shots. But I might be completely wrong in that. That's just from my limited. Anyway, so where do we want to start here? Let's talk. The first, there are a couple things you need to know, and you have to know going in to your one shot what the hell you're trying to do. So the first question is, how long do you have? Do you have 1 hour? Do you have 3 to 4 hours? Or are you and your friends sitting down to play D&D for like 8 to 12 hours?
The whole day. The dream.
Right. You get pizza, a bunch of drinks or beers or whatever, and you just play. You got to figure out what do you have to play with? How much time do you have to work with? Because that is super important when it comes to figuring out what you're going to do in your one shot. The next question is, how many players are there? You're playing for a big group, like 7 or 8 people? You're playing for a fairly small group, 3 to 4 people? Or 3 people, 2 or 3 people? Or you're playing for like a medium group, 4 to 5? figuring out how big your group is and how many players are in your group is going to heavily determine how long things are gonna take. So that ties into how long do you have, and then how long are each of the little things you want to do gonna take.
Yeah, it really everything kind of factors back into that main limiting condition, which is how long that you have for your whole kind of adventure.
Yeah, and then the third real important facet to focus on is: are players coming with characters? Are they coming to the table with pre-made characters? If you're playing with new people, do they understand anything about the game, or are you going to have to work them through it? Basically, how familiar and how prepared your players are going to be. A lot of groups will sit down for a one-shot and make their characters that day as a group for the one-shot. That's awesome. I personally think that's one of the better ways to do things. But other groups will come up with, everyone will have their totally ready-made characters, and they'll sit down at the table for the one-shot. And other groups still will be kind of half and half. So as a DM, coordinate and make sure you know how much time you're going to need for that beginning prep before you even play. Because if you're trying to sit down for a 2-hour one-shot and no one has characters ready, you're going to be playing for like 20 minutes after building characters for an hour and a half.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. That is the most common mistake that you see people running one-shots, in particular, again, in this kind of realm of time. People will prepare all of this huge amount of content that they're really excited about, but they won't factor in things like, oh, well, 2 extra people join the party unexpectedly, and so now combat's going to take another, 10 minutes per all of these combats that I have set up to factor in all these extra slots in initiative. And we have to build them characters. So that's another hour. So just think about how prepared everyone is going to be going in. Absolutely. It's just something that should be in the prep.
Wanted to point something out here, somewhat unrelated. Farku in the chat made the best point ever. Running a one-shot is the nicest thing you can do to your permanent dungeon master. If your dungeon master is the kind of person who's always DMing for your group, who always is the one behind the table, playing all the monsters, building the world, catering to you as a player and to the rest of your group, if you decide, hey, I'm going to run a one-shot so you can play Dungeon Master, that is pretty much the best thing that you can do as a player. It's just, Dungeon Master's like playing too. That's all I'm saying. That's all. I'm putting out there. Yeah. Rest in peace, forever GMs.
Even those of us who are forever GMs and like GMing, usually I'm one of those. I love to GM, but I still like to play every once in a great while. And yeah, people are saying, it's more fun to improv your characters at times. I saw Infinite Typist recommending the hit random on D&D Beyond until you have a party. I mean, that's a really fun way to play it. I'm sure, I think especially for more experienced players, just kind of randomly creating a character and just seeing what you get would be a really fun way to run a one-shot.
I mean, another thing Blunderloot just said, or create your own campaign. Yeah, I've played in campaigns where we just did rotating one-shots until one of them really resounded with us, and then we played that one as a campaign. And that's awesome. That's another great... One-shots are important. That's all we're getting at.
Absolutely. So I guess, let's start getting into kind of the... I was going to say, you want to start getting into kind of some of the nitty-gritty about how to actually create? Because we talked about you want to build a satisfying conclusion and how to actually do that and to structure your game.
Well, I mean, I think before we can talk about that, right, we have to talk about the thing that everyone does wrong. The thing that more than ever we see go wrong in one-shots, whether it's one-shots we've run or played in, and that is, we've been beating around the bush the whole time, it's the timing. It's planning the appropriate amount for your one-shot. So, Pete, what are the components to one-shots? What are the different pieces that go together to make a really successful, or not even a successful one-shot, just a one-shot adventure?
A one-shot. So, yeah, the 3 components that are going to make it up, and I'm going to sound like a dummy when I say this, are the beginning, the middle, and the end. But we'll talk a little bit about what each of those things entails. So, a basic kind of description of each to make it a little bit more complicated to begin with, is the beginning. What a one-shot is in the beginning is your characters learn what it is that they are going to be doing. That can be any number of things. For a classic example, as we move through this, let's say that there's a necromancer in a tower that they have to go and defeat, or otherwise, rescue some kidnapped noble from, or whatever their specific task is. But they have to go to this necromancer's tower and roust them out of it. So at the beginning, they learn that they have to do that. The middle is where they will travel to that tower, and that is essentially what the adventure is. In going there, they overcome whatever obstacles are in their path. They climb up the tower, and then they reach this necromancer, and then the end is where they complete the task. They defeat the necromancer, and then they have probably a big party that you narrate after, but isn't that much play. The real end, so to speak, is just the kind of battle with the necromancer. And this is a very kind of specific example, but that structure should be, I actually think that this is a structure that should be applied to every one shot. I don't often make absolutes like this in like these talks. I usually try to be pretty open, but I think having this, you tell them what they're going to do, you bring them to it, and then they do the thing that they were supposed to be doing. I think that's a structure that you should always apply. Of course, there are variations on that, and we'll start talking about some different ways you can like kind of play with this formula, but that is an excellent place to start.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the best parts about it being a one-shot, right, is you look at a full campaign, right? And you're trying to tell your players, you're trying to push your players toward engaging with your plot hook, but you don't want to force them to do it, and they just aren't biting. And that can be really frustrating for a dungeon master. In one-shots, everyone's coming to the table saying, I want to play a one-shot adventure. No one is going to, let me rephrase. No one should come to the table knowing they're going to play a one-shot and be like, oh, I don't want to engage with this story hook that you're very clearly giving us. And if they are, they're an asshole. But
yeah, it means they're testing you and they want to be like, what? You're going to take away, you're going to railroad me? Just, yes, I am going to railroad you. That's what you signed up for.
It's a one-shot adventure. You signed up for this, literally. But anyway, it's great because you don't have to worry about the old, oh, you start in a tavern, you look trustworthy, let's go adventuring. Because that's the gimmick you signed up for. You're all sitting down, you're an adventuring party, and you're going on this adventure. Or maybe you're playing some other one-shot with some other basis, but the core remains the same. Not having to weave that nuance of why the people are adventuring together into the story is a really big deal, one of the huge benefits, especially for newer dungeon masters.
And so how do you do that? How do you like kind of skip that phase? Well, you just skip it. You tell your players, you can tell them as much or as little like out of the game as you want about it. But a great strategy to use for one-shots is to literally just tell the players, all of you have known each other for a long time. Maybe you can say they're old adventuring friends that have been adventuring together for an established period, so they don't have to like be forced to role play some awkward kind of like getting to know you scenes. You can tell them that, they're co-workers that have worked together on different tasks before, and then you can just tell players that they have accepted this quest. Like in the premise of your adventure, you can say you have all agreed to travel north to this mountain range to slay the ancient dragon Balroth, or whatever your ancient dragon's name is.
Good name.
And thank you. And your and pretty much all players will just be like, all right, I have agreed to this. I can work off this role-playing cue that is like, this is something that I think and I want to do this. It's going to be extremely rare that someone gives you pushback on that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, two great examples. Let's talk about what we do here in Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time. On Fridays, Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time, the premise is when players first come in to play with us, it's you, regardless of your backstory, at this point, you are an adventurer in Bartholomew's Adventuring Company. Why are you here and how did you get there? You ask, we ask the players and we give them that minute or two to say, well, how did this happen? And a great thing to do, especially if you have a longer play period, like 4 to 8 hours or something, if you're running a one-shot, is have all of the players give a brief description of their character, like 2 or 3 minutes tops, and then ask the first player who went, how do you know the other players? And then ask the next player, how do you know these other players? And go through down the line. And at this point, it's this really interesting moment where all of the players get to say, this is a thing about that character that you made that you just told me about that I think is the most interesting. And it really feels good. The players get to interact with each other and engage a little more, and they skip that step for you. Because you tell them you know each other, tell me how you know each other, come up with it. And I'll tell you, your players 100% of the time will do it and come up with some ridiculous, hilarious narrative as to why they know each other and are working together. And I personally love that. I find that a ton
I do too. It'll almost always come out like over and over again throughout the adventure too. You'll see it like just back and forth. Just the players will kind of like really lock on to that a lot of the time because it's usually the only thing to lock onto at the beginning of one of these.
Yeah, and I mean, other great examples. You're all prisoners. The Forgotten One saying in chat, that's a very common setting for a one-shot. You're all X, you're all Y, you're all adventurers in this guild, you're all prisoners in this jail, you're all whatever. And that's, this is enough in a one-shot for players to work together.
And even like that all prisoners scenario, I think that's a really interesting one because that's a little bit different than some of the other ones I set up, which are the more kind of traditional adventures, where you're talking like, oh, some quest giver tells you to go to this place. And that one, even though you're not telling them to go to a specific location, they're all just kind of in a prison cell. You can say kind of anything really, or just let them know like, your goal is very clearly to get out of the prison in some
escape.
way. Yeah, you're trying to escape the prison. So there's a very clear, even though it's kind of implicit in just the setting, there's a very clear direction that all of the players are being kind of pushed into, and they understand what that is. And I think that's like, aside from establishing that everyone knows each other and are cool, I think establishing that the players know what their expectations, this is the thing that we're going to do, this adventure, is really important right from the beginning.
Exactly. And yeah, I just wanted to point out a funny thing in chat, Ingram9. I think this was a joke question. What do you call a one-shot that you've been running for 4 sessions? Farku says, good. Well, obviously it's good enough that people have been playing it for four sessions. The real answer is it's short-form adventure. But anyway, yeah. It's that's not a bad thing. Often, sometimes it can be though. Running extra session, anyway, we'll talk about that later.
So the next thing I think logically that would make sense to talk about is the middle. But I would actually like to go to the middle last because I think that's the most complicated one. You down to talk about the end?
Yeah, because the most important parts of any one shot are the beginning, when characters, this is your modus operandi. This is what you're trying to do. And then the end is, this is what the conclusion is. This is that part that you want to be satisfying. That'll make people say, yes, wow, that was a ton of fun. I want to play more Dungeons and Dragons with you. So the end is when they complete whatever task they're trying to. It might be stopping the ritual of the cultist to bring Tiamat into this realm. It could be defeating the great dragon, what do you say, Balroth, in his lair.
Could be defeating Tiamat.
Yeah, it could be summoning Tiamat into this world. Like, it could be anything. It'd be a real fun one-shot playing as the cultist, just trying to defend.
Oh man, I kind of want to do that. Like a tower defense one-shot. That sounds very pleasant.
But anyway, it's the climax of the adventure. It is the most exciting, engaging, fun part. It's the reason they've been playing along this whole time. It's what happened. It is do or die. And that's great. I love those parts. Because in a one-shot, if you lose, you lose. What a lot of Dungeon Masters can be kind of soft when it comes to what happens in a long-form campaign, because people get very attached. Yeah. And so in a lot of long-form campaigns, it ends up being like, yeah, the players are going to win. It's going to be dramatic and cool, but they're going to win. In one shot? Oh, jeez, I'm afraid to kill everybody.
All bets are off. Tiamat's 5 heads could bite off all of your players' 5 respective heads simultaneously at the end of a one shot, and everyone will remember it and think it was awesome, probably.
Yeah, basically.
But your ending is your climax. It's the chance. It's the kind of moment that everything that you've done has built around. It's your payoff for running the one shot, and you really need to kind of like make sure that you give your ending a lot of respect, because here's what happens, and this is where that mistake often comes in that we talked about before of running out of time. What tends to happen is, yes, you go through, you had like this big elaborate introduction, you spent too long making character sheets, the troll that they had to answer a riddle for when they crossed his bridge, they ended up like joking around with that troll for a whole hour long, which you did not anticipate, and then they get to the bottom of the tower, and the evil cultist within kind of looms, and it's time to go, and you have to rush through that fight in 10 minutes, what should be like the real climax and the satisfying ending. So making sure that you leave yourself room to really let whatever it is that your one shot is building towards come to fruition is like the real trick of running a one shot.
I completely agree. And also, thank you for your support, Infinite Tacos. 5 months, we super appreciate it.
Oh, man.
It's been a lot. It's been a
5 months we've
gotten our... Yeah, right? Weird.
I was just thinking the same thing. I did not know.
But as a general rule,
thank you, Infinite Tacos.
I'm jumping back on. As a general rule, if you have 4 hours to run your one shot, try and plan that climax, that end, at least a quarter of the time.
Yep.
At least. Give it the time it deserves. Now, if you're in a longer one shot, like you're playing for 12 hours, all right, you don't have to dedicate like 3 hours of that to the ending. You can, and it'll be a dramatic as hell ending.
But a couple hours, an hour and a half, absolutely.
Yeah, hour and a half, 2 hours. Give it the time it deserves. And if you're playing in a 1 hour game, well, you don't have a middle, basically. Which is why we haven't talked about it yet. If you're playing in a really short one shot, there's no middle.
That's what DnDTime is we tell you what you're doing, and then pretty much always you go do it. Sometimes there'll be a little thing. Yeah, sometimes there'll be like a little vignette in between that's an extremely short encounter, but most of the time it's just, we tell you, especially the boss battles, because we really want the boss battles to have that epic feel. When we run a boss battle, we pretty much just go straight to single encounter. This is the big thing that's happening, because we just don't have time to do much more than that in DnDTime, which is a fun way to play too. It's always just the best stuff.
Yeah, so I think we just talked about the beginning and the end. So what happens in the middle, Pete?
So the middle is the adventure, really. The middle is where players are going to be doing most of the time is going to be spent on that. The beginning should probably take, if we're talking like a 4 hour game, you probably had a half an hour introduction, and then you're saving an hour at the end for your big boss battle. That means you have 2.5 hours of content that's in the middle where they're doing what it is that they're doing. And what can happen in that, well, obviously that's anything, and it depends on the adventure. But basically, you should think of your adventure on the whole in terms of encounters. Encounters is a term that we use a lot. I don't know if we've ever defined it on stream, which I'm going to just briefly do now. But when I say encounter, what I mean is it's like a single unit of D&D activity, one event. A fight is an encounter. Yes. A conversation with an NPC can be an encounter. A skill challenge is an encounter. A puzzle can be an encounter, and any number of things. Anything that takes time and that requires the players to interact, that isn't just raw narration where they have to make choices and do stuff. One segment of that is an encounter.
Exactly. And so basically planning this middle segment is the most important part to really running a one-shot. Because let's be honest, if you're running a one-shot and you're like, we're going to fight the dragon Balroth, right? Now let's stick on that one because I like that one a lot. I think it's a very common trend is let's go fight the big evil dragon. Let's be honest, as a dungeon master, you know what you're going to do with that dragon. You're going to open up your monster manual and look at the ancient red dragon, and you're going to be like, wow, I'm going to make him a cool lair, and he's got these cool lair actions, and this is the fight, and I've finished planning it. And maybe you come up with a couple of cool things that the dragon can do in his lair, or a couple of cool minions. I say their lair. And you come up with
give him a few personality quirks and make him your own dragon, But
let's be honest, that's the thing that you're always thinking about. You're always thinking about how cool your final villain or monster or whatever is going to be.
Which is good.
So that's easy. You don't have to plan too much for that because, to be frank, you're going to naturally do that. You're drawn to it. It's just the nature of a conclusion. So really, you got to think of what happens in the middle. That's what you have to plan. And so planning these different encounters, these different complications, is really, really important. And that's the place where people go wrong. They come up with a lot of different ideas that they think are cool. So maybe as they travel through the forest to get to Balroth's lair, you are accosted by the kobolds, which serve Balroth. Ooh. And then you come to a gate with 2 watchtowers that the players need to find a way around because the gate is too well defended. Or whatever for the players to just besiege, so they have to sneak through it, trick the guards.
There's only one entrance to the tower that they have to climb, where the dragon's lair is at the top, and the kobold guard inside will only accept one password to open up. And also, thank you very much, Reflected.
Gosh, what a beautiful supporting day! I love you guys.
Much appreciated.
The next thing might be you're climbing the mountain to Balroth's lair, and there is a skill challenge involving dodging the avalanche, right? The falling rock.
Yes.
These are all cool ideas, and they're all important because they make the encounter for the adventure feel like a real adventure, but they also are really important, and this is the most important part of running a one-shot. Know what you have to do and what you don't have to do. You know what I'm saying, Pete?
Absolutely.
If you're running behind and you've started and you've run, you say in that situation where you have the kobolds attack you in the forest, the guard post in the mountain, and you start with the kobolds in the forest and the party takes forever. What do you skip? What happens next?
Well, you had planned a big kobold ambush on the mountain where they were all going to kind of like jump out and come after you like his more powerful minions. But since you're behind, that ambush just doesn't happen. And once they reach the mountain, they kind of climb up top. Maybe you still run the avalanche because that was a really cool and much different than a lot of the other things that you had done in this adventure up to that point. And maybe you still have time for that cool avalanche skill challenge, but you skip that kobold ambush and they get to the lair a little bit sooner. The players have no idea that that ambush existed. Until you've said that the kobolds come out and ambush them, they don't know that there were kobolds to begin with. So they don't feel like they've missed anything. And you've cut probably a 45-minute battle out of your adventure time that you can make up and allow yourself to have that kind of satisfying conclusion.
Exactly. If you're going to have, especially a lot of players, right, will have in these little encounters, situations where players can learn the lore, right? The history, the important details of what's going on. They find out that the cultists are actually conducting a ritual instead of just being cultists. Do that at the beginning. Do that as quickly as possible in the middle section, and then plan to cut. Plan, 5 encounters or however many you think you might need for the middle section, and look at the ones that you've placed further back in the middle of your one shot, closer to the end, and say, what here can I cut? What isn't important? You had a cool battle planned with the ancient dragon's lieutenant, a powerful, like
a half dragon.
Yeah, a half dragon, right? Or a powerful devil or something, or an Arcanoloth. And that's fine. Skip it. Like, it's cool, it's dramatic, but that's not going to be as dramatic as the boss fight with the dragon, or just
it's not
together,
worth diminishing. Yeah, it's not worth forcing your ending, your big climax, to be diminished for the sake of whatever like smaller thing that you wanted to cram in before it. It's always better to give your big ending space.
Yeah, like we've been saying, you're naturally going to gravitate towards planning the ending. That's just what's going to come into your head anyway, because you're so excited about this big enemy, this big fight at the end. It's going to be cool. It's going to be dramatic. It's going to be awesome.
The ending is probably why you thought of your
rushed.
adventure in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. It's the premise. It's the adventure hook. Stop X from happening, or go get Y, or whatever.
That's like, pretty much every adventure you just described right there.
Yeah, 99% of them. Oh, like Tomb of Annihilation. Go stop the bad thing. You know, like every adventure in Curse of Strahd. Go stop Strahd. That's what every major adventure that's ever come out has followed that basic premise. And if you played through Curse of Strahd and then never fought Strahd or got to satisfying conclusion with that, it would just suck. Especially after how that adventure beats the shit out of it.
Jeremy, may I proffer an example of a time that we've done this in D&D time?
Absolutely.
The Leggy Boys.
Yeah.
I mean, what happened to the Leggy Boys was a tragedy. But we had kind of established our beginning and middle and our end in our first myth tier adventure with our myth tier players here on D&D Time, where they had to go into Clinton Slaughter Murders, trash compactor, and basically clean it out. Garbage disposal, my apologies. Oh yeah, trash compactor's a lot bigger. And they had to go into his garbage disposal and deal with his terrifying takeout that he had disposed within and unclog it. So essentially what happened was they went through, we had our beginning where we told them that they were going to go into it. We had an encounter where they battled a lot of the food from his takeout. There was the broccoli treants and whatnot. And they went through that, and it took a pretty long time. And me and Jeremy had planned for this encounter, this group of onkegs that we called the Leggy Boys, which are essentially just ants. We were using the onkeg stat block, and they were just these goofy swarm of ants that they were going to have to do battle with, and that was it. They just had to do battle with these kind of like funny ant characters that we'd made. And we got to this point, and we realized that we had spent a good amount of time on the first battle, and we really didn't have time to run a whole nother encounter before we got to our boss. So, Jeremy, do you want to tell them the conclusion of what happened to the Leggy Boys?
Yeah, the players said something. We introduced the Leggy Boys. There was like a very brief conversation, and one of the players says, "I cast Moonbeam on the Leggy Boys." It's like, yep, all the Leggy Boys die. They're ants. They died in Moonbeam. Done. We were going to have that be like a big battle, but we needed to get past it to the climax. So we just let the players smash them. And I'll tell you, maybe I'm wrong. Correct me in the chat, Adrian P., if you're here. I have a feeling trashing the Leggy Boys was a lot of fun for them.
I think trashing the Leggy Boys and the resulting consequences of the Leggy Boy, single lone Leggy Boy survivor just weeping over the death of countless of his brothers and sisters was a lot more interesting of a story than even if they had just fought them.
We made that a little sadder than it needed to be. But the point is...
It was very sad.
We just as easily could have not even mentioned the Leggy Boys. The players don't run into the Leggy Boys, we're done. We just really wanted to mention the Leggy Boys, so we briefly mentioned them and then destroyed them. Like, you can do that. It's totally cool. And yeah, a lot of stuff like that's great. That's just how you roll with it, basically. Let's talk a little bit about sorry, go ahead.
I think I was just going to introduce the next thing, which is what you were doing, so please feel free.
Yeah, I was just saying. So one-shots, generally speaking, forget one-shots. Most games follow, or most tabletop role-playing games, follow a general geometry to how they work. And I use the word geometry very intentionally here, because they can be organized and set up in very specific ways. So, for example, the most obvious and most common and straightforward way, especially with one-shots, is the line, or the railroad, as many people call it. It's very linear. They go from point A to point B to point C, and then they get to point D where they defeat the bad guy. Super straightforward, pretty basic, or they complete whatever quests they have. Then they have to be defeated the bad guy.
Yeah.
And that's just basically how it works.
Yeah, I mean, the great thing about the line, it's just so easy that, like, it's a really good place to begin in designing a story structure, because it's just, it's just event happens, and each one leads into the next one. For one thing, if we're talking about shortening time, a line is a really easy way to just chunk time in and out. You can just take out a piece and kind of, if you're connecting them in blocks, you just take out one block in the middle and then slide the two that were on either side of it together. You have
point D, and point C now goes to point E. Ta-da!
Yeah. It's easy, but it's also effective, and it's a great way to run adventures. It's I would say that the easiest way to put together a one-shot. There are a couple of other things that I don't know if you have any kind of of your own internal ideas, Jeremy, for how you kind of structure a one-shot, but I have three kind of major formulas that I used, and I labeled them there on our note. But the other one I have is...
Your terminology is a little funky. I would have used different terms, but...
yeah, I mean, what have you? These are just my own ways of referring to them. I have the next one that I call the door, which is, I think of it very much as sort of your Zelda game, your classic collect the MacGuffins to reach the end. In Zelda, we collect the spiritual stones to be able to get the Master Sword, or in any case, collect the keys to reach the boss. I run adventures like this pretty frequently. This is a little bit of a trickier kind of adventure structure and setup, but basically at the beginning, they're told they have to do a certain number of tasks, whether it is actually collect the things, defeat the 3 sub-bosses to fight the boss, or it does not have to be 3, obviously, either. It can be,
whatever number you need.
But it creates a little bit more of a... It starts to give you a little bit more of that feeling of freedom while maintaining a very clear structure and progression forward for a one-shot. I recently ran an adventure for my friends at home, actually, in the Trash Kingdom, where they had to walk around the dump collecting spare parts for a big robot battle. And each spare part was essentially its own mini adventure that they could tackle in any order, and none of them were related, and they were all roughly the same difficulty. So they could just kind of walk around the dump as they chose, visit all the different regions, and then collect cool parts for the final battle where they built a robot using their parts and battled other robots. It's a good structure. The reason it's a little bit more difficult than the line, I would say, is because it tells them at the beginning that there are certain things, so it gives you a little bit less flexibility in moving things around, because you're told you have to do these 3 things. So in order to kind of change that structure, it's difficult to have them get like 2 keys to a door with 3 locks, and then kind of be told that, like, oh, it's fine, you can just go fight the boss. Like, you kind of have to do all the things once you establish this.
Yeah, so I think that's probably the most dangerous one to run in a one-shot. If you're going to run that, do it with a longer form game. Do it with an 6 to 8 hour game. It probably isn't wise to try and do that in 3 hours. Just because
certainly not
with all the time constraints, you've built boundaries for yourself. Yeah. So I didn't mean to cut you off.
And then, oh, no problem.
Can I talk about the sandbox? I'm excited.
Well, I specifically called it something else. So talk about the sandbox.
So the sandbox is a third kind of game. And the sandbox in one-shot terms is basically you set out an area. Maybe it's a building. Maybe it is a town. It's a general location. And the basic gist of that is players can go wherever they want. They can interact with any of the things that may or may not be there, where they are learning information, gathering allies or resources. They're doing something. They're interacting with the area, and in little ways, they're progressing the plot. And then at an appropriate time, you progress the plot. So maybe they are in the town, and there is the one shot, right, is that there is an orc army that is approaching the town. And so a great sandbox or toy box adventure, whatever you want to call it, might be you're going around the town and you're helping to set up defense. And whatever those are, you have no idea as a dungeon master. This is where you're totally improving, and you say, players, what do you think? And they say, oh, I want to go to the walls and help set up like oil traps or whatever, or that kind of stuff. Coming up with that, or I want to go to the library and research what former orc armies that have attacked the city have been like, or what have you. Coming up with those kind of things, it's entirely up to the players to what they want to do. Maybe they want to go and recruit other people within the city to help defend the walls, and that's like some social encounter. And then at a predetermined time, this gives you almost the most flexibility as a GM in that situation, where you can just say, and now the ending is happening. Because it's not time-based, it's not locked by any sort of keys or a requirement to accomplish anything. It's just the players are futzing around, having fun.
Yep.
Pete, was that basically what you wanted to say? Or?
I think it's pretty close. The term that I specifically used was the toy box, which I like in the context of a one-shot. The reason I chose that term instead of a sandbox is because I think it's better personally. And I mean, I guess it depends on the group. And I think what you're talking about can also work too, where you just kind of like give them free wheels and have them kind of improv. But that's a lot more, I think, transactional between like a player and DM, and I think requires a bit more of an experienced DM to run. But my term that I used, the toy box, what I was thinking is less of a space where, like sand, you're like building like little sand castles is what I think of when I think of a sandbox. I think of it as a box where you're taking out all these little tiny things that are inside that the DM has prepared and let them play with them however they want, which is a little bit of a nuanced difference, I suppose. But so, for example, your kind of fun house. I ran an adventure like this recently in DnDTime where there was just a house, and inside the house there was just a million tiny little things to interact with. I described the room. I described the room as having, things like grandfather clocks and tables and all different like cabinets, and just kind of prompted players to be like, oh yes, I want to open this cabinet and see whatever little thing is inside. And then, whatever like toy is inside or whatever. I think at one point there was a garden gnome that talked inside of a cabinet that someone picked up. Yes. That someone picked up and then interacted with kind of over the course of the rest of that adventure. And so that's what I was kind of specifically referring to when I was talking about the toy box, is just having just a fun space to kind of play in that's a little bit more prepared and less kind of like player interaction heavy. But what you were talking about, I think, also is a really great way to run a one-shot. And one of the things
it's
about
a bigger toy box.
It's just kind of it's a toy box without rules. Yeah. I don't know. And I think one of the great things about one-shots really is just that freedom to create and to, take risks and try like weird adventures. I know that both of us here have run some really weird adventures on DnDTime. Do you have one that sticks out to you?
Geez, you're throwing me on the spot. I have a lot that stick out to me. One that's always stuck out with me for a long time is a long while ago, before a lot of you folks were even here, Twitch chat. Only the veterans will remember this.
Oh, yes.
It was the entire adventure was spent falling down an enormously deep well. All of the combat was done falling from through the air. There were skill challenges to avoid hitting things that were in the way, blocking the well, blocking the passage below you. And I truly loved that adventure. It was just a ton of fun. And it was real weird. And it's great. So that was something
that was one of my favorite.
To me.
As you say, that was an adventure of yours that's probably one of my all-time favorites.
And Pete, same question, throwing it right back at you.
Oh, fair enough. Let me pick one that I think is not You know what? Here's one that I tried something really wacky on, which was a Green Sun cult adventure that I ran at the power plant in Central City, where the players went in. And if you've ever seen my Green Sun cult adventures, you know that they're already pretty abstract and very surreal. In this kind of almost like Lovecraftian, you're not entirely even sure what's happening horror, is generally what those are going for, but with like a kind of a comedic undertone. It's a strange thing to begin with. But what I was trying to do in that adventure was deal with some really interesting kind of like questions of time paradox, where a lot of the where one of the players had to go and rescue an employee from this factory, but it was just her over every day of her life that she had worked here behind the doors of the inside of this power plant, which is really trippy. And it was way more than I think could have ever been reasonably accomplished in a one shot that's supposed to last an hour. I think the adventure eventually ended up lasting 2 hours, and I had to rush through stuff. And it was, I mean, it was an interesting adventure, I think, but I learned a lot about what you can get done reasonably, like what is within the scope of reasonable for D&D time from that adventure. And I improved a lot from it too. So even though like the adventure didn't pan out exactly the way I wanted it to, I still like learned a ton from it. And you can do that when you run one shots. Like you can take these kind of risks and, you know, worst case scenario, it doesn't go well. And it was just a one shot, you know?
Well, and another thing about that kind of adventure, right? That specific one, in Pete's example there, the reason it went 2 hours, it took as long as it did, is because Pete hadn't planned out ahead of time things in the middle to cut out.
That's true.
That's a super important note, especially if you're trying something that's way off the cuff. Plan to cut. Plan things that are non-essential in the middle that are, I'd love to have this in my game, but if I run out of time, we're going to skip this, and my players will never know. They'll be none the wiser that it ever even existed. And that, I mean, we use Pete in this example because he brought it up, but there have been many a time when I've done the same exact thing. So it's not like me ragging on Pete. It's just
me and Jeremy have had basically every time after the games are over, y'all, me and Jeremy after the stream are sitting in a room by ourselves for like 20 minutes, just being like talking about our adventures and what we learned from them. And I mean, I think it's fair to say that there's been nights when we've gone on it, like we've just like gone down. Yeah. But we like talk about what we learned and like what we were able to, you know, if there's something that we did well, if there's something that we did not. And I don't know, it's just one shots are a great way to improve and to learn and just try new stuff, which is what I really love about them.
Yeah, and you know, if you guys love your Cults of the Green Sun, I'm gonna run a Cults of the Green Sun adventure this week.
Oh shit, really? I didn't know about this. Oh damn, I'm excited.
Should be interesting. I'm also doing something really bad. I'm using that door option where there are a bunch of keys that they have to unlock. Well, not proverbial keys. So that could be a mistake. We'll see. Anyway, that could be a long adventure is what it could be. Hopefully I do a good job.
I'm
we'll
excited.
Talk about that after. And anyway,
yeah, I'm excited.
Let's talk about a couple last little tidbits. We're on to our last few moments here. So there are a few other things that you can do. We've talked about the very basics of running a successful one-shot, how to but how to maximize the likelihood that you will be able to actually, that you'll have the time and you'll be able to execute your satisfying conclusion. Because that's what it's all about, is getting to that satisfying conclusion and executing it, and then everyone being happy, being like, that was a lot of fun. But there's more you can do to make one-shots interesting. One thing that, so a great way to do this is to look at other role-playing systems. For this example, I'm going to talk about a role-playing game called Paranoia. I'm not sure how many of you are really familiar with it, and maybe Paranoia wasn't the first, you know what? Odds are Paranoia wasn't the first game to come up with this gimmick. However, I'm going to talk about a cool gimmick in Paranoia that we're going to borrow, and I'll tell you, it's a lot of fun, especially in longer one-shots. And that gimmick is give all of your players their own secret mission that they need to accomplish during the one shot. As a dungeon master, talk to your players, know their characters before the game, and give everyone the full mission and give everyone a secret mission. One of the great things, especially if you're running with a lot of players, is having one player be the straight man, where their secret mission is just make sure the actual mission actually happens. So if it's save the princess from the tower, you make sure the princess is actually saved from the tower. Another great secret mission to give people is make sure the whole party makes it out of this adventure alive. Another great secret mission that you can give someone is murder the princess. Because these all make incredibly interesting and engaging intra-player conflicts throughout the game. A great example in a classic Save a Princess from the Tower adventure that I played in not too long ago, one of the players' secret missions was collect as many articles of clothing throughout the adventure as possible, I think was their mission. They ended up with almost everyone's clothes by the end of the adventure. In character, of course. Not like, oh boy, that'd be a really weird adventure. Everyone's just naked at the table at the end.
That's D&D late nights.
Ugh. Yeah, I mean, there are a ton of really great ones. You know, some of them might be murder as many people as possible throughout the adventure. Like, you can come up with all sorts of crazy, ridiculous things, especially if you know what the adventure is going to be. You can cater your secret missions to that adventure. And they end up really engaging the players on a deeper level, especially when players buy in that they're supposed to be subtle about it, right? When you tell them, hey, I'm giving you the secret mission, if you can subtly accomplish this without everyone else realizing it, that's going to be cool. And it's great because you can often tie those secret missions into character packs. And it's cool. It's a lot of fun. I highly recommend doing that, especially if you have a lot of people and you're sitting down for a long time. If you're like 6 or 7 people, you're sitting down for an 8-hour game. Give everyone their own individual silly secret mission, and it'll be great. It's excellent.
I was going to say, I think along kind of a similar vein, another fun thing you can do is just give everyone, like, for example, if you're all playing kind of, let's just assume that you're playing 5th edition, give everyone some really cool tool as well that no one else knows that they have. Like, just give them a sick magic item that they didn't pick that you just went arbitrarily and gave them, because there's no consequences also. Like, you can do things in a one-shot that would destroy a regular campaign. You can just give your level 1 fighter a +3 Vorpal sword if that is your desire. You can give, you can give your rogue the ring of invisibility. You can give maybe even a luck blade with 3 wishes on it might be too much for a one-shot. That will destroy your one-shot if you give your players 3 wishes. But just about anything short of that, it does not really matter. Wondrous items are the best for that.
Another great example in chat, Roger Twy, you were saying, I thought you were going to say give them all 6 clones. That's awesome. That's how I ran. When I ran the Tomb of Annihilation, I've run it several times, but
Tomb of Horrors.
When I most recently the Tomb of Horrors, sorry. When I most recently ran the Tomb of Horrors, I had all of the players come to the table with like 3 backup characters. And I gave a couple of them different missions that would involve killing other players. And there was this fantastic point. I don't want to spoil too much, but there was an amazing part of the adventure where one of the characters was hanging from a ledge above lava. And one of the other characters ended up grappling a third person, casting grease on the ledge, and getting all 3 of them thrown into the lava. And it was wonderful. Oh, it was great.
That was me. It was ball bearings and also slippery oil that I slicked on that.
Right, that was you, Pete.
I was daggered double on them.
Exactly, Crowley. But yeah, like, putting these little gimmicks in there, these fun little things, if it's extra lives, that's totally cool. That's awesome. It's an extra shtick to make it a little more engaging. You don't need to have these gimmicks. But if you're running a lot of one-shots, these gimmicks can be really easy to come up with. really cool
Deck
magic
of Wonders,
item.
anybody?
Yeah, right.
I assume you mean Deck of Many Things by that, right?
Yeah, I mean, seriously, like, roll with whatever.
Yeah,
Anyway.
I mean, we could talk about the subject for a long time, but I think we're getting pretty, the unintended, I love that one-shot idea that you just had, Tyler. One shot I give a player a wish ring. The unintended consequences of the wish is the adventure. I mean, that sounds pretty fun. But yeah, I think we're pretty much out of time, Jeremy. Is there any last stuff you'd like to get in?
Yeah, all I want to say is play one-shots, dudes. One-shots are
great. For sure.
They're just awesome. And actually, there's another announcement I wanted to make, and that is we currently have a feedback form available. We have put together this little form. I'm going to post it in Twitch chat. And essentially, it's just a small questionnaire about D&D time, the content we provide, how we provide it, and what kind of content we want to provide in the future. So if you guys wouldn't mind, we would really super appreciate it. I mean, it won't take you more than 5 minutes tops, I'd imagine.
Jeremy, Alex pointed out to me when I was I saw this that we currently have a 500 character minum for short feedback on D&D Time Brews, specifically on D&D Time Brews.
Yeah, I'll fix that. But yeah, if you guys would not mind, we super appreciate. I see maximum. Super appreciate people going. Yeah, why is it minimum? All right, that's fixed now. Super appreciate your responses. This means a lot to us. It's how we make D&D Time better. So, best. Yeah, please write a dissertation on D&D Time. No, but yeah, it's going to really help us moving forward. Our last survey helped us immensely. It helped to make Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time what it is today, which, in my opinion, is awesome. So, yeah,
we would really appreciate it. Thank you in advance. Yeah, me too. And with that, just a reminder to tune in to Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time on Friday at 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, 6 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, where you can see everything that we talked about tonight being put into action, maybe, assuming we don't break all of our own rules, which we do all the time, I'm sure. So come tune into that. And then on Sunday, we'll be doing another Delves, I believe. We haven't gotten
Delves
availability for that. Okay, cool. Another Delves on Sunday, same time as D&D Time would be on Friday. I think that's just about it. And definitely, 100%. Tell us over the course of the next week what you want to see us talk about. This was actually a topic that was requested originally by Infinite Tacos, like quite some time ago, which it took us a little while to get to it, but we will get to it, and we don't have any big idea for next week. So tell us what you think. Yeah,
and one last thing, sorry about this. Quick scheduling change up. For those of you who hang out for D&D Time Behind the Scenes, where I set up our Delve for Sunday, prep everything, convert it from 4th edition, and set up Roll20. I'm going to be starting that at 10 a.m. Pacific time on Saturday instead of the normal 1 p.m. Just because scheduling works out that way. So that's all. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out. Without further ado, I'm Jeremy.
Wait, actually, can I just say...
with further ado,
I just wanted to say one more thank you to everyone who subbed tonight, which was, I believe, we had Infinite Tacos, Fox in the Box, and Reflected 10-8. All of you subbed, and thank you very much for that. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, your support is amazing. Thank you.
I didn't forget anyone, did I?
I don't believe so. I'm going to triple check right now. And also, for the rest of you, you don't have to sub to give us love. And actually, you don't have to subscribe to give us love. You can just tell your friends. Word of mouth is the #1 way we grow.
Yes.
If you love anything about D&D Time, if you love our adventures, if you love our charming personalities, if you love Pete's dashing good looks, if you like the smooth and silky voice that we use when we do D&D Time Brews, if you like literally anything, tell all of the people that you know, everyone. Random passerbys in the street, scream out in the middle of the road, Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time. And
come play some D&D with me. Money equals true love. All right, I'm Pete.
I'm Jeremy.
And this is Pete and Jeremy's D&D Time.
Pete, you fucked it up.
Wait. Oh, fuck. I didn't even know that I fucked it up. All right. I love you all.
Bye, everyone.
D&D.